So this is part of the sort of activities that, as Climate Action Stokesley and Villages, we're trying to do to, as it says there, get to net zero basically as quickly as possible. And we're looking at one of the big things is certainly going to be housing. And I just want to set a little bit of context for this. Very much think global, act locally. So we're trying to look for local things we can do. And this is one of them. Just a quick overview of CASaV. We basically at the moment got 5 groups: energy, food, nature, waste and transport, looking at things we can do in those particular areas. I know we haven't got a specific building group, but I think it fits very well within both energy and waste from the point of view. We certainly don't want to waste energy, and there are lots of new technologies along that also help us to do energy better help reduce carbon in houses. I just want to say a quick thing about why scope counts. I mean, the UK is doing pretty well. And the gross figures you will see is something like we've reduced by 50%. However, those emissions have been from shifting from coal and electricity to gas, and also a degree of offshoring. Our manufacturing isn't using as much carbon because we're making it in China instead. So, if you see something, our GDP is going up and carbon's going down, the two don't perhaps correlate quite in that way. If you look at that more, then what you've actually got is an awful lot of, there are still quite large emissions from aviation, shipping, and manufacturing from goods in China that we should really include within our total. And that's not, it's not detracting from what we've already done, because I mean, this figure here, a lot of that is real carbon that isn't being emitted in the UK, and that 20% there is real carbon that isn't being emitted globally, so that's great. But if we're going to go forward, the scale of the challenge is quite big. And it's not just for us, it's for the other countries we're working with, it's getting agreements. So COP26, the agreements to come back in a year's time and look at what they're going to do is really important and really good to hear they're going to look in a year's time. Because 5 years is a long way away, which would have been the other situation. So okay, we have a net zero strategy, which is great. We have a net zero strategy, we have a target to go for and build back greener. And obviously what counts now is what's actually going to happen. I mean, you're seeing that already on Teesside with net zero Teesside, the planning applications going in for hydrogen and so on. Hopefully these are the right things to do, and I mean that's another whole discussion. But why we're here tonight is that bit there, basically 100 million tonnes of carbon dioxide a year is from heat and buildings, and a lot of that is domestic. So we're not going to tackle it for the country as a whole. There's an awful lot in transport in there. I'd almost say from that sort of 200 up are things that our behaviour and what we do, because it's about domestic transport, it's about international travel, it's about your house, are things where you can have a big effect. Water, fluorinated gases, agriculture and so on are not what individuals can do. There are choices you can make in there to have an effect. So that really is sort of why we're here tonight. And I mean, the other thing you could say is, well, hang on, we've got lots of wind and we've got lots of solar, and that's going to solve it. We just get more and more wind, more and more solar. It's not going to solve it without changes, because I mean this is quite an interesting one. Actually that's the carbon produced by power generation at the moment, and it's pretty small because we've got so much solar, we've got so much wind, we've got nuclear and so on. That's the rest. So that's the bit inside the country we need to bring down. So there is a lot to go for in there. And that's also why some of the technologies you're hearing about in terms of heat pumps are so important, because they will shift that carbon here into this bit here. And if we can continue to decarbonise the electricity grid by using low carbon methods of generating electricity, then we're going to just bring this down naturally. Why the government's grants for heat pumps are a good idea. So at this point I was going to hand over to Jonathan. Hopefully he's going to just walk in the door, just like that. Well, that's perhaps a bit hopeful. I mean, he's probably still 3 or 4 minutes away. I think one of the first things he'll probably want to know is just what we hope to get out of him. Why? And I think it'd be great if you could write a little think, and if you really why are people here? What's driving you to be here? Have a think about that one. Equally, what do you think we can get out of Jonathan? I can tell you a bit about why I'm here. Having retrofitted my house sort of 8 years ago now, I guess, time flies. And then I've seen other people come and say, they either say this is stupid, why have you done it? Or they say, how do I do it? And actually, that answering how is pretty difficult, because there aren't a lot of skilled people around here who know how to do it. There isn't a lot of infrastructure in place to help them do it. So really, if you don't go to an architect, you know, to actually get a proper whole building approach, then you may do the wrong things. You know, installing a heat pump without any insulation in your house will give you a big shock, because basically gas is a quarter of the price of electricity per kilowatt hour of heat, and oil is probably not too different to that. So if you don't insulate, you'll be using a lot of electricity, and even with a heat pump, you'll be at roughly the same amount of cost for electricity. I mean, I only need to point out if I'm wrong, because this is not my area of total expertise, it's what I picked up. But yeah, so that's why mistakes, and when you hear people are not happy, that's because they've been told, you know, solar panels are going to cut your electricity bill by 90%, or, you know, heat pumps are going to save you so much money a year. You know, the people who are happy are probably more people like me who did it at least partly because they wanted to reduce their carbon footprint. And I don't know, I mean, the sort of reasons around here is, you know, I think the other point is that we tend to point out, and the sort of climate assembly that happened in the UK last year, you know, unfortunately people heard a lot about the difficulties, rightly so, but what wasn't painted was the picture of actually living. I mean, we moved from a 1955 rather drafty, rather damp, expensive to heat, occasionally smelly from the wonders of oil, house to somewhere that was a 2013, you know, standard house, but also cosy, warm, and with you know, relatively little running costs, which you know, or at least, you know, certainly no more running costs. But that was after a considerable investment in heat pumps and insulation and all the rest of it. So, any thoughts, comments? Anybody disagree? David, yeah.
I'm interested in knowing, Simon, you said you did your own place. What did you do?
What do we do? Right, okay, sorry. We did, so basically I started off, you know, I wanted to do it properly, so I went to a company called EcoArc, who are architects based in the Lake District. At that stage, they were one of the few, I mean, probably not one of the few, but one of the few northern-based firms that actually sold themselves on being eco-architects. And they designed me a sort of sub-passive house, system house. It was originally going to be biomass heated, because that at the time seemed a good idea. I sort of fell out with them partway through, just because they would, being involved in an architect, there are a scale of fees. So you pay so much for the, and this is rather than an architectural technician, if you're a proper architect, and there's an RIP, so to fees. And things like 25% of the final build cost being my total bill for them was something I wasn't very comfortable with. In hindsight, it might have been a good idea, because actually to do this properly. So what did I do? We basically ended up taking the house apart. So we filled, the cavity walls weren't properly filled, so we refilled all the cavity walls. We put external insulation on the outside. We dug up all the floors, put underfloor heating in, insulated under the floors. Then obviously the roof, well, so the roof came off. So we went from having basically 33% flat roofs and 66% sloping roofs to 100% sloping roofs. So we moved the pitch of the roof to cover all the sloping part, and that was all then properly insulated. And at the time we used PIR, so polyurethane type foams and things for all the insulation. If I was doing it now, I'd probably be more likely to go for sort of wood fibre or something like this, a more natural product. But you know, from a carbon point of view, you know, it's the right thing to do, because you know that carbon is trapped within the polyurethane foam. It's not going to come out in a hurry. What else do we do? Yeah, so instead of going for the biomass, I mean, once I looked into it and just thought, you know, once I heard the biomass was going to come from the States, I sort of went, hang on a second, you know, this doesn't really make, you know, a great degree of sense. So what we then went for was a ground source heat pump, put two 80-metre boreholes into the garden, put pipes down and up again. So that's how we get most of the heat. Put solar thermal on the roof, and while we were doing, put some PV panels on. So I get about a third of my, I mean, effectively my electricity is roughly a third. I get about the same amount as I consume in the house from the, without the heat pump, from the solar panels every year. And I get about, and I use about that amount as well to heat it with the heat pump. And then for the sort of techno blitz of it, every single light switch is radio controlled, or can be, and I'm monitoring the inputs and things like this. But equally, on a heat pump heated house, you know, we keep the temperature pretty much constant. We have a wood burner occasionally we put on to, you know, sit in front of, and that helps, but it's not a major source of heat. So we did everything we could. So rainwater collection for flushing the toilets. And yeah, that was sort of it really. But, and it was, not, and I guess, the sort of thing you hear, with the sort of stuff that Jonathan's doing, a proper deep retrofits like I've described in a way. And, terraced house, 2-bedroom, well, yeah, probably now 3 or 4, but I mean, what was originally a 2-bedroom terraced house in Manchester, they're talking about around about £50,000 being the cost to properly retrofit that. And I think that's one of the things I wanted to explore with my Jonathan was, often people have heard, I do a little bit of insulation, I save £1,000 a year in my bills. It just doesn't, it doesn't work that way. So I think how do you get people to understand and how do we get the language across? And, a £5,000 grant for a heat pump is good, but it's not going to pay, all the costs. And I think the other thing is, with us here, our houses are worth not an inconsiderable sum number of money. So rather than necessarily expecting grants, we should be getting some access to finance that is low interest, but in the end it's a loan, not a grant. But I mean, that's getting a bit sort of political at that point, but I think there's only so much money to go around, and you've got to somehow, And I'm interested in in a way, Powered Retrofit with Carbon Coop are doing this, is that they're issuing shares that are then funding them to do work. People are paying for that work, and then they're paying interest that people are giving them shares. So, it's sort of win-win in that type of thing.
Because if you have a funding system such as the one that's supposed to be starting next April, of course, it sounds good, but then it's a disincentive to do anything before then, isn't it?
And that's the fear, yeah. I mean, a lot of people now I think are, there. So Jonathan's here, so you spared me in a second. So,
Another cup of tea.
yeah, I was going to say, Jonathan.
You might want to go to the loo and all those sorts of things.
So, while we're waiting for you, can I ask you about planning? Did you have any problems with others?
So I think hopefully planners are a lot better now, but others may be able to comment. I had a bit of a farcical situation with the planners, that it was a 1955 bungalow, bizarrely we're in the conservation area, whereas the vicarage across the road, an 1820s vicarage, is not in the conservation area. We're also in a national park, so, anything I wanted to do, they originally rejected the black solar, well they sent me back things and said generally think it's a good idea, however we don't like the black solar panels on a red roof. You need to have red solar panels. Now, red solar panels don't exist because basically they wouldn't pick up any energy. So, I submitted the planning permission and it got rejected out of hand. But basically one line, and I was a bit upset because I had consulted beforehand. This had come back as a comment, and in fact, with the planning legislation at the time, if it was a serious thing, they should have given me an alternative way of saving the same amount of energy. They didn't, so I assumed it wasn't a big deal. They rejected it, basically on the fact I had black panels on a red roof, which wasn't very helpful. So I went through a bit of a debate with them, and in the end, in essence, I took them in 4 designs, and some of the things they didn't like was the house would have been asymmetrical, with a green roof at the back and so on, and they didn't like this. So in the end, I've ended up very symmetrical. Actually, a better building, a lot more expensive. It was a matter of really showing them and explaining them what I'd done, rather than trying to do it through the formal process. And equally,
it's interesting, Simon. You don't need planning permission to put the panels on, do you? Or is that to your conservation area?
it's conservation area, and I don't know how it's changed since. Because I started this in 2007, and we didn't actually do the building until 2012. So,
The legislation says wall,
Right, okay.
so it's a conservation area, allowed to put it on a roof.
Right, okay.
So
They paid by me to show the letters, that's why it got thrown out,
that's where they get mixed up.
Yeah, okay.
But, yeah.
I mean, it was at the time, I discussed it with them. In essence, they said, look, you can go to the Ombudsman. And, I then said, well, what's it going to do with it? Oh, the Ombudsman will rule, and then it'll come back to us. So I might as well have a discussion. So I just had a discussion with them. And they weren't, it was just the process is a bit opaque, and it did seem not entirely focused on the energy bit, it was focused on the conservation bit. And so yeah.
Could I just ask about your cavity wall insulation? What was wrong with what you already had? Had that been put into the original building, or had it been put in?
Well, part of the building being extended at different stages, and it looked like somebody had tried to put cavity walling in a place that didn't connect with the rest of the building. So there actually were huge gaps in the cavity wall insulation.
Right.
It would have been very poorly installed. But also the cavity was very small. It was only something like 40 millimetres. Is that too small? But it was, what typical
50s he was putting in.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it was 14, and they felt, so even when we put the cavity wall insulation in, to some extent as a belt and braces, you know, we might as well do that while we're at
So you
it.
have to suck the other out.
Well, in essence, we'd taken down a lot of the bricks, so a lot of it had already fallen out. So I mean, it had already been taken. Because in order to get to take the floors out and things like this, we'd made a lot of holes in the fabric. So, you know, it was, I mean, once again, you know, if I'd not been a conservation area, I could have pulled the house down. I didn't want to do that because we wasted materials. But I would have only had to pay 5% VAT then, instead of 20%. So I paid 20% on everything apart from which I pay, so I think some of the other energy measures, but all the standard building work I was still paying 20% on, whereas a new build, is it zero VAT even, or it's 5%, is it? Yeah, I mean, energy measures I think were 5% as well, so yeah.
So you're encouraged to knock the building down because it's cheaper than...
You could say that, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I do.
you are.
You are, okay, yeah. I couldn't possibly comment as yes minister or whatever. No, I mean that's great. Okay, thank you. Jonathan, right, good to meet you. I hope to talk to you in the car. Sorry about that. You've had the journey from hell. That's pretty normal on this route, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I spent most of it just sat on the train, so. But yeah, sorry to be late.
Well, no, it's not your fault. No, I mean, I was leaving Manchester Piccadilly. We pulled out the platform. The train stopped, and they then said, "No, so we've got a city." We sat there for an hour because there wasn't a platform available to take us back in. They, in the end, took us to Manchester Victoria and unloaded us to get across to here. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's, there is a lack of capacity on the route. So Jonathan, yeah, I mean, I've sort of just, I introduced, I didn't share my slides with you, you shared it with me. So I've just pointed out that, you know, lots of the carbon is now not in power, it's in other things, so hence why we're here. I pointed out this business that, you know, 100 megatons of carbon dioxide is coming from basically heat and buildings, once again why we're here, and just that, you know, the sort of classic that we have other emissions that we're not necessarily counting. So 50% is a bit optimistic, but you know, it's pretty good what we've done, but there's still a little way to go, and that's really what I pulled out. And that was the point where I was going to do dum-dum-dum-dum. Are you ready to...
Yeah, happy, yeah.
So, yeah, Jonathan's co-founder of Carbon Co-op. You know, just got the Ashton Award winner, well, Carbon Co-op, and I guess you as, you know, got a lot of the credit for that, for the green skills. You know, trained over 1,000 people in construction, you know, green construction skills. And there's lots of cosy homes over Manchester that are your fault. So brilliant. So right, if I hand you this, it's fairly simple. There's a laser on the back of that, and there's left and right. Let me just, I'm going to do one click and then it should be here. No, hang on a second here. Okay, one click and then it's you.
Simon, were you talking about recording it?
Sorry, it is all being recorded, yeah. So yeah, people, you're all being recorded. That's at the start, yeah. Jonathan did agree. So the projector's just there, so I don't know if you want to be, where you want to be, just,
So, yeah, thanks really very much for inviting me and for coming here. So, yeah, I'm Jonathan, so I'm actually from Gisborough. So I left 20 odd years ago to go and do environmental science at Manchester University because I was really enthused by science and wanted to do something, and I went to ICI and I did my work experience, but at the same time it's very timely, the Rio Summit was happening, you know, and made me realise that, you know, this was one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face. So after doing environmental science at university, I became quite frustrated by the fact, as a scientist, I felt anyway, that you were just meant to document things, you weren't able to make a difference and change things. So I got into cooperatives, worked for a number of cooperatives, ethical consumer magazines, some people might have heard of or read, and got involved in environmental direct action as well, against roads and climate change and what have you. And then more latterly, sort of brought that together with Carbon Co-op. Where I was living in Manchester, it was apparent, this is 10, 15 years ago now, that the energy transition was going to happen. After many years of kind of brick wall and people not listening, it was actually going to happen. But for me, I wanted to make sure that communities, cooperatives, people had a part of that, were able to benefit from that. And it wasn't a case of the same companies that drove the hydrocarbon economy, just we started paying them for windmills. And I also felt that a bottom-up approach to tackling climate change, one that was based in communities and grew up from there, was more effective than a top-down approach. And I worked with an organisation called Urbed, who are mostly doing architecture, green architecture. We still work together today. So it was partly me and partly them working together to develop Carbon Coop. So that's my little journey. I'm going to talk about retrofit and energy efficiency in homes. It sounds from the conversation actually that people are quite knowledgeable, so some of this might be quite obvious and you know I can whiz through, but some it might be new. I suppose, yeah, maybe like a few hands really. We normally, sometimes, if it's a smaller number, I'd like everyone go around on why you're here, but maybe we could say, show of hands, who has heard of retrofit before today? Quite a few people heard of it, yeah. Who has retrofitted their home in some fashion, shape or fashion, a little bit? Fantastic. And who sort of done a whole house retrofit and they can't go any further? Wow, brilliant. Well, that's great because I think part of Carbon Coop's success, and Simon's asked me to talk a little bit about Carbon Coop and how we've got to where we are. Part of that success is to be able to bring together people that are just starting out on retrofit journey with those that have gone down the line, and to bring people together to share knowledge and experience and expertise. So we can do questions afterwards, but yeah. Why? I mean, again, this sounds like people are quite on it already. So why would we retrofit? Well, I had a fantastic introduction to that from a climate change perspective, but also we need to face the fact that in the UK, we industrialised a lot sooner, a lot quicker than a lot of other countries, particularly in Europe, and we have some of the most oldest housing stock, some of the most leaky, and the most in need of refurbishment in general, not just about climate change. So retrofit also has impacts on comfort, on health. There are huge health impacts to living in a cold, drafty home, especially in places like Manchester, which is quite damp. Lower energy bills, obviously. I think that was one where for quite a while people were, energy bills quite stable. Now it's brought home to us the impact, the vulnerability of homes that are using a lot of energy to the higher energy bills. And about future-proofing, really. Increasingly people are interested about the impacts of climate change, what's coming down the line. So what is retrofit? So this is not every retrofit home, but this is our whole house retrofit in Greater Manchester. So what I'll talk to you about, this is one of the ones we've worked on. What I'll talk about is a little bit, some of the measures that are involved, and it sounds like people already have good knowledge there, but anyway. Things like internal wall insulation. So it's that's about pulling the plaster off the wall, insulating and plastering over. I should say actually, given some of the conversation I heard earlier, I'm not an architect. So we work with architects, we employ architects and engineers, but very technical questions I'm not able to field. But this is internal wall insulation. This is one of the properties we worked on. So yeah, that's taking the plaster off and internally insulating. There are lots of risks involved with that around water and dampness and that sort of thing, but it can be very effective when done properly. This is not external wall insulation, but the footings of external wall insulation, which is going on here. That's expanded polystyrene at the bottom. We call that like a splash zone. So we favour things like wood fibre insulation rather than things like expanded polystyrene, but the footings helps with waterproofing and what have you. This is underfloor insulation. Can get quite dirty, can be quite, especially in Manchester, there's a lot of voids underneath the floorboards, or basements or what have you. So yeah, and that's some sheep's wool going in on the right hand side, quite exciting, but yeah, not without its challenges. That's some of the external wall insulation rendered on the front. This is the same property that I showed at the start that had lots and lots of scaffolding around it. This was an interesting one because there's a bay window there, you might be able to see. So as part of the refurbishment, they rebuilt the bay window that was subsiding, so they were able to improve the property as part of the eco works. triple glazed windows. These are some going in from West Yorkshire, the Green Building Store. They actually originate, the wood originates from Eastern Europe due to its very hardness. But fantastic kind of improvement to quality, to comfort in the home. And heat pumps. We were talking about this on the way here, that heat pumps increasingly being talked about as an alternative to gas boilers and to oil boilers and other forms of heating. I won't go too much into heat pumps, but if there are any questions, we can talk about it, definitely. And then there are other things like solar panels on the roofs, electric vehicle chargers, and other smart systems increasingly out there. So all these together, retrospectively fitting energy efficiency improvements, micro generation, clean generation, and smart systems. That's what we talk about under the kind of umbrella of retrofit. Oh, and also ventilation. Mustn't forget that. Often forgotten, increasing awareness around COVID, obviously. But the more that you insulate a home, the more you reduce, the air leakiness and increase air tightness, as we say. The more important systems as an air ecosystem for ventilation are to that, so that you don't get a build-up of moisture or other toxins or what have you. So what I'd like to emphasise is retrofit is entirely possible, because sometimes you get the impression it's not possible, it's too hard, it can't be done. But it is possible, and it's producing results. And as you said, we've been retrofitting homes throughout Greater Manchester for a number of years now. We did a big project in 2016 called Community Green Deal, which was the retrofit of 12 properties, average costs of £40,000 per property. We were able to get them some zero interest loans, which was fantastic, really helpful, but a lot of their householders put some of their own money into that as well. So we saw gas savings of nearly 50%, carbon savings of 62%, bill savings of nearly £1,000 a property, and an average bill total after the works of £200 million. There's some allowance there for the feed-in tariff, which is obviously not available anymore, but it shows you the kind of depth of impact that you can get there. And this is some real-world data from one of our householders who was involved in that Community Green Deal programme. Obviously, it's quite hard to see on the side, but what I like about this graph is it shows the carbon descent journey that this is a guy called Dom has been on. So you can see he moved in there, and this guy's been taking his meter readings every month since January 2003. So you can see, to begin with, he brought down his energy use, and this is equalised for external temperatures, so it takes account of a cold winter or a mild summer or what have you. But his initial journey, his little steps down, he did a little bit of internal wall insulation in his front living room, he converted his loft, did gradual improvements, replaced a few windows, and put some secondary glazing, so that single glazing at a secondary panel there. And over 10 years, basically, he made good progress down. And then he had the Carbon Coop retrofit. This data actually is cut off slightly, but he had the same impact with that. He had £20,000 worth of work on that programme. So the same impact in that big bang as he'd had in 10 years. But that's not to say either or is the way to go. Incremental stepwise improvements, when and as and when you have access to the funds to do so, are effective over time. But you can also achieve a big bang by a whole house retrofit, going at it in one go. So there's neither right nor wrong there. And a bit about our approach to retrofit. How do you make this happen? A few things around our kind of underlying approach here. For us, it's always about fabric first, is what we call. So it might seem that solar panels are a great way to generate clean energy and get some negative carbon emissions or what have you. But actually, from a retrofit point of view, we'd always say, think first about the property and the quality of the property, because there's no point putting solar PV panels on a falling down house, and that means investing in the fabric of the property and thinking about things like gutters that sometimes or the quality of the roof and what have you. Think about a whole house approach. Now, a whole house approach doesn't mean doing everything at once, but it means about having a plan and making sure that the measures that you install are complementary to each other. You don't have to go in, put something in and take it out later. So we look at it holistically. There's no point insulating a loft and then thinking about the loft hatch. That's just a small example, but yeah, it's thinking about it as the house as a system. And consider, the whole house is about considering the interaction between measures. You might, insulate one part of the house and do it really well. Well, actually that means another part is relatively colder and can lead to things like condensation. So when you consider things together, taking a considered stepwise approach, you can avoid these unintended consequences. And having that whole house plan, as I say, it doesn't mean doing everything at once, but it does mean having a plan to get there for your property. So things to consider. So this bit is a bit kind of food for thought for people. Obviously we've got a few people who've done everything they want to do, and that's great. But in terms of if you're starting out on this and you're thinking, how should I start out? What should I do first? Here are some things to consider. The first thing is to consider what your priorities are, and to always think about that as a house as well. Because sometimes you think, my priority is this, but you have to have that shared vision for the house, the people that live there. And this is some research that we've done over the years about what the motivations of the householders we work with are. They tend to be about carbon emissions. Let's say we work with early adopters, or environmentalists, or people that are particularly concerned about climate change, but they're people that want to do something as well. So mostly, and that's a bit of turning on its head a little bit what policymakers, when we talk to government or local elected officials, they might say, oh, actually it's got to be about money, but actually when you talk to people, certainly those that are willing to go first, it's about carbon. Secondly, it's about being warmer, being more comfortable. And then thirdly, reducing energy bills comes into that, money comes into that. It's not, it's not a consideration, absolutely. And then making the home more climate resilient. This is a factor that's become increasingly prevalent in the research that we've been doing, which is really interesting. I think in the last 10 years, people are more aware of the climate impacts. They've seen the flooding events, they've seen high winds and such. And think, well, if I'm going to retrofit my home, I want to make sure it's going to be fit for these perturbations that we're going to see over the next few years. So having a shared idea about what your priorities are is really important to setting your brief for your project, for your retrofit. Secondly, your budget, having a good understanding of the money that you've got. That's obviously going to dictate the scope and the scale of the work you're going to do. Is it a fixed budget? Are you looking for a financial return? Do you have funding available? Episodically, funding is becoming available, but often funding comes with strings attached. There's a lot of discussion about the heat pump incentive that we'll see next year. Will it force prices up? Will it take people down certain routes that they might get? Be better going down a different route. Discussion about that, but yeah. Just finish my tea. And then thinking about how you're going to procure the work. This is something we always like to remind people when they're setting out on their refurbishment journey. And it's the three trade-offs of time, cost and quality. Then in approaching your retrofit, you can either have it fast and good, or fast and cheap, or good and cheap, but you can't have all three. It's not going to happen in the middle. So if you want to do it good and you want to do it fast, it's going to be pricey. You're gonna have to invest into that for the speed. You might not have the money. You want it cheaper, and you can say, I want it good quality, but it's going to take a bit more time. And if you don't have the money, there's a certain amount of thinking you've got to do, or you've got to, stagger your journey and what have you. And of course, you can have it fast and you can have it cheap, but it might fall down and it might not be the best quality. So again, what we ask, when we run these workshops about people wanting to retrofit their homes, we say, well, what are your priorities for the house? You know, and try and place yourself on this map here, these three things. You'll always get one or two people that put their thing in the middle. No, want it fast and cheap and good, you know. So, yeah. And how are you going to procure the work? So you've settled on your motivations. You understand, you know, where you're going. You've got your budget. But how are you going to procure it? You're going to break it into packages, or do it as one big go. Are you going to do some of the work yourself? Are you going to bring in a mainstream contractor and try to upskill them and talk to them about what you want to have done? Might be something that's relatively new to them. Or are you going to work with specialist retrofit contractors? There are some out there, they're not many, and they tend to be very popular and in demand, and sometimes a bit more expensive because they are in demand. You know, obviously they've got fantastic expertise. So, and it might be, and quite a few of the people we work with mix and match all these, you know, so they do a little bit of it DIY, and they bring in a contractor, and they bring in some specialists as well, you know. And I mean, it's really common, we get asked, you know, it's like, how do you find a good contractor? How do you go about it? And the thing I would say is, it's not that much different to any kind of contracting job around the house. And what are the good qualities of a good contractor? And which of the builders you normally use, and recommendation, looking for experience, looking for examples of past work, having a chat to them. Can you work with them? Do they understand what you're trying to achieve? Do you have good communication? These are typical things for most contractors. Would you recommend them? Yeah. Okay, so that's a little quick whiz. We do like an hour and a half version of that, which is all about getting to the intricacies of retrofit and all the different things. But I wanted to give you a bit of an introduction to that, and then we'll go on to talk about People Powered Retrofit and Carbon Coop, because particularly wanted to, a little bit of an insight into the work we've done and where we've come from. So now move on to Carbon Coop. So we started out on that journey like 15 years ago. We actually incorporated as a cooperative, a community benefit society 10 years ago now, 10 years ago in August. So Carbon Coop is fundamentally a membership organisation. So a community benefit society, people join as members. We benefit the members, but also the wider community there as well. And the communities around disseminating the knowledge and the learning that we do and benefiting wider people. But the members are generally householders like yourselves who want to make an improvement to their home and to their community, and they're motivated mainly around climate change and mainly about making a big impact on that. We absolutely understand there's a role for people doing small changes in their everyday life, and we absolutely support that. But for us, and starting Carbon Coop, we always think about that huge challenge of climate change and what's the big, you know, meaningful things that we can do that maybe demonstrate to other people what's possible. And yeah, just go out there and try and achieve like biggest change possible. Talking to other community groups, but also government and other people around you know, Europe as well. So members join because they want to make a difference on climate change, but they want access to technical expertise, often as part of that. They want recommendations on builders and contractors. They want to be part of projects that we're running. They want to get access to low-cost finance and zero interest loans that we might be running, that sort of thing. But fundamentally, and this is what I was saying earlier, they join to be part of a like-minded group of people all doing a similar thing, to feel part of something where they can feel supported, because, you know, you've seen earlier, the scale of climate change is quite daunting, and when we think about the individual actions we can do, it can be quite disempowering. But when we work together, we can support each other with the knowledge and the learning and feel more able to do something to make a difference. So that's the kind of reason behind Carbon Coop. We set a membership fee right from the start of £35, and not really to generate loads of money, but to ensure that people that joined joined for a reason. That, you know, £35 is not something you can just chuck away. It's a deliberate thought that you make and decide, yes, I'll join this organisation. And that's because we want, as a cooperative, we want members to be leading and be part of what we do. And we get fantastic engagement in lots of different ways, and not least the annual general meeting and people that are standing for the board as well. So yeah, we mainly have people in Greater Manchester, but actually since lockdown, a lot of what we've done has gone onto the internet, and we've had people join from all over really. We've got 380 members, and that number's growing by about a third a year. So it's actually really picked up since climate emergency became more of a kind of thing. And things like COP and what have you really remind people of this kind of thing. Just a little bit of background, the organisation, for many years we were like voluntary, then we started to employ a few staff members, just on a kind of freelance basis, here and there. But then as we grew and grew over the years, we now have got 20 members of staff, and we've got quite a big reach, do quite a lot of stuff. But that, what I often say to groups is like, that didn't happen overnight. That was like, 15 years we've been going since, we started that idea with Urbed, 10 years incorporated. So it's been a build-up over years, and it hasn't happened overnight by any means. And what the kind of things that we do, and these are the things that really engage people and interest people and get them excited. We do loads of eco-home bus tours, now obviously less since the pandemic, or during the pandemic, but top left-hand corner there, they're a fantastic way to get people energised and interested in retrofit and to see what's possible. And so what happens is we've had 2 or 3 eco-homes in an area, we hire a bus, get people on the bus, drive round each in turn, everyone gets out, has a look round. Fantastic is get to meet the householder. Often they'll have pictures and show the work that they've done, might have some stats, something to look at. Every now and again you'll meet a contractor there. Maybe there'll be works going on, maybe if it's timed right. As you can see bottom left there, that's in the middle of a project. But it's a great way for people to understand what we're talking about, because it can seem very kind of abstract sometimes. Bottom right hand corner you can see that's Eddie with the glasses on. He's talking about the size of the external wall insulation we put on the side of his house. Interestingly, that was a conservation area, but it was very challenging with the planners, and we're lucky that we have Urbed, our planners, they have the planning expertise, so we can have those discussions. But yeah, it can be very challenging. Top right hand corner you can see we do a lot of workshops, a lot of putting experts in front of people from different expertise like architects, engineers, all sorts of people really. The workshops, really engaging people, really excited about skills that are kind of applied to their house, things they could do in their house, knowledge that helps them go through the process of retrofit. We try and make them low cost or access things like lottery funding and that sort of thing. To make it all achievable. More latterly, the workshop programme has gone to a webinar basis, and during lockdown it's really taken off. I mean, before lockdown, we might do workshops for a few hundred people in a year, and that was fantastic, it was great. Last year we reached nearly 4,000 people through the webinars we've been doing. They've all gone on our website, and we've got a YouTube channel now as well. They tend to be quite long and quite in depth, so if you're really geeky about this sort of stuff, check it out. There are other places like the Energy Savings Trust and what have you where you can get more bite-sized information, but this has been great in kind of servicing a need that's out there and engaging with people. And also on our website, if you're interested, we have loads of reports and publications. A lot of the science, the Powering Down Together reports there about the retrofit programme that we did, a lot of detailed technical data there. We contribute to all sorts of things. So that's on our website under what we do. So that's a bit about Carbon Co-op. I haven't really gone into it in depth and detail, but we do interesting stuff on the energy system side, using data and the web, more flexible energy use, trying to respond to the more episodic wind and sun and what have you, engaging with heat pumps and control and all this sort of thing. We've got a lot of web developers, software developers on the team. We're also involved in energy commons projects, that's advocating for citizens as part of the energy transition, because the changes we're seeing are huge. But I'm not going to talk about that in so much detail because time's tight, and I know we want to in particular think about people-powered retrofit. So yeah, with Carbon Coop, over the years we've been doing those engagement things, the workshops, the visits, all sorts of things. But one thing we found was that people will be energised, and we do whole house assessments for people, can go to their property, give them a list of things they can do. That was really good, but then people were getting stuck. People found that it was challenging to get contractors, but they also found that the decisions they were being asked to make were quite daunting about their property. You know, we've touched a little bit on the things that can go wrong, you know, like, oh, what am I going to do? And also they had different contradictory advice. I read this here and I thought that, but then someone said this, and so I didn't do that. And what we found was that people were kind of getting stuck. They were really infused, and then they were kind of stuck. People-powered retrofit was our response to that, to say, okay, you've got so far, but you're clearly not gone all the way. How can we create an end-to-end service to start with your just general interest and your advice and take you all the way through to doing the project? And this is a bit different to Carbon Coop. It's part of Carbon Coop, but it's a bit different in that it's a fee-earning service, so it's something we charge for within Greater Manchester and a little bit beyond. But it's a social enterprise, so it's a business, but it operates for social good. And I'll come on a bit about where we're at with it at the end. But yeah, what I want to do is just introduce it and the journey we've been on. Just being aware that we'll finish with enough time for questions. So yeah, people-powered retrofit, this was our idea, the end-to-end service. And in 2018, BEIS, the government department in charge of energy and industrial strategy, put out a tender. They said, we want to learn how we can create retrofit markets of retrofit in local areas. And we were one of 6 pilots around the UK, people-powered retrofit. We were the most north in Manchester by about 200 miles, unsurprisingly. I think actually Newcastle are quite a good bid, but anyway, weren't successful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach here. It builds on the stuff we talked about motivations and people. I think one of the things that we've really learned from this is that to focus our service on the people and the different people that are out there. This is in contrast to things like government schemes that tend to think everyone's the same, everyone acts the same, they're all the same. Actually, people live in very different houses and have very different motivations. And so the foundational work we did on people-powered retrofit was to do a lot of research and ask people what were they interested in. And we had climate pragmatists. Those are people that are motivated by climate change, but no, they can't do everything. So she's trying to do what they can do, and yeah, let's see what we can do. And the climate idealists on the right-hand side, they're people that will do everything and anything to make their home as low carbon as possible. And that guy, Dom, he's the guy with the graph that descends. And since that, he's fitted a heat pump, fitted a heat battery, got an electric vehicle. It's just, that guy just can't be stopped. He's just going and going and going. And we also had civic-minded retirees. And these are people slightly older who work in the community or are part of community groups and like-minded groups and think it's their civic duty to do something around climate change, to improve their homes, also to live more sustainably in the latter years as well. So you have these different personas, we've got a few more as well, but it's important to think about different people and different motivations. This is another thing, like a lot of people, let's say again policymakers, government and what have you, say, no one wants to retrofit their homes. You've got to persuade them, you've got to force them, or you've got to spend millions and put adverts on the back of buses and in the Daily Mail and all this sort of thing. It's like, it's nonsense, because there are loads of people out there that do want to retrofit their homes. They just don't know where to start, they don't know what to do first, they can't find the right people. And a lot of the work we do is called it's a slightly technical term, community-based social marketing, but it's essentially working with community champions, trusted institutions, church groups, community groups, local authorities, but working together to create campaigns that are across the community that access lots of different types of people. And it really, it's about opening a door rather than trying to sell people something, you know. And this is our approach, is around community-based social marketing. Now, contractors, again, and Simon kindly mentioned our Ashton Awards, which we're very chuffed about, but the Ashton Awards, International Awards for Climate Change, and we won ours for the green skills work that we've been doing. And I suppose a few things to say about that is, some people think, if you just throw contractors' work, they'll just jump on it. Actually, that's not the case. We need to actively build our supply chain here, work with the contractors we have, help them with the skills they need to grow their capacity to do this stuff. I'd also say, for many years, we kind of haven't really invested in our supply chain, invested in our manufacturing base, the whole kind of supply chain that goes with it, and a lot of the educational provision as well. We don't teach some of the core skills that we're going to need in the next 20 to 30 years. It's too much looking back, with some of the technical colleges, it's a lot about gas boilers and it's nothing about heat pumps, and there are a lot of gas boilers need repairing, but we're also going to need to fit a lot of heat pumps as well. The other thing about contractors, I would say, is that we'll often expect people to come out from their workplace, to take time away from the jobs. Often people are very busy, they're already working, flat out. Ask them to put the tools down, to come out, to go to a classroom, to drive 50 miles, to spend their evening or their weekends learning a tick box, and then you've got a piece of paper. Actually, our approach is like, let's go to the sites where people are already working, let's work with contractors and their networks and do the work there and do the training there on site. So yeah, a lot of our approach is around that. It's about having respect and engaging with the supply chain that are already out there. Understanding those networks. Again, some policymakers think, the people, they just don't know anything, poor builders, they're a bit thick. It's just like, no, they're highly skilled. They're highly skilled, but over the years, the judgment of success has been very different to what we're talking about now. It's been about what it looks like to finish and not about what's behind it, behind the wall or, under the floor, so to speak. So it's about engaging with the RMI, refurbishment, maintenance and improvement. People already doing work in our homes, doing loft conversions and extensions and all that sort of thing. And the training needs to be practical and it needs to be peer learning as well. That's the training we've done, where it's contractor talking to contractor, it's work within companies and between companies as well. Because again, that's the most effective way to spread knowledge, and I think the last point is, often there's a job there to talk to contractors and say, this work, it's a bit different to what you've been doing, it's a bit more technical, it might be a bit messy, refurbishment, but, and the clients, we can bring you good clients, basically, who are knowledgeable and know what they want, So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done on the contracting side, but I feel it's like a huge open door there. We were visiting Harrogate College just like day before yesterday. They were like, right, we want to invest in this, we want to train people in this area. And I know like York College are interested as well, and some others as well. And quite a lot of Carbon Coop, this People Powered Retrofit journey is about designing a service that works for people. Again, there's an assumption that just put it in front of people and they'll work it out. Actually, a lot of our work on this has been spent with householders, contractors, the people at the sharp end, basically, who are going to use the service, testing it out, making it work for people. This is our very, very rough this is a summary rather of our customer journey. It's not the best contrast, is it? But it starts with advice and a retrofit advisor to help people. Yeah, that's a bit better. Yeah. We'll say that. Advice at the start, setting people out. then making a plan, a home energy assessment, a whole house assessment for people. Then we move on to design development. So it might involve an architect, it might not need to do that, it could be the contractor just leading on that. Then we do procurement support. We don't operate as builders or contractors, but we help householders to procure contractors. And we have our trade contractor network that they can procure from. Then we have on-site support, which sometimes involves training with contractors on site, but also involves a quality assurance framework to make sure the work is of a good quality, and then there's handover at the end. And just to give you just a flavour, there's lots of different people involved in this process. Again, sometimes people think, oh, it's just trades, it's just, you know, plasterers and joiners. But actually, it's quite a few different disciplines here. Advisors, service designers, we've got a lot of IT systems that sit behind it, training managers, assessors, coordinators, engineers, contractors, architects, so all sorts of people involved. And yeah, it's been going really well. We've got about 75 clients on the books so far, all at different stages, all moving through. We've recently finished our BASE funding, the support we had from government, and now we're running independently, so generating income, generating service. A lot of interest from other parts of the country, people able to like help them, little stepwise moves around the country. And a few tips, I don't know, but for people who might be interested in doing this sort of thing on a community scale, I think the thing for me is to understand that one size doesn't fit all, that how this kind of service looks in different parts of the country depends on those areas. You know, it's a very rural area here compared to very urban areas, things are very different. For me, it's about building trust from the start. As a community organisation, not for profit, we've got very good trust. You know, people trust us, we're not out to make a quick buck. Being very client focused and focused on the householders and what they need. Doing some mapping and research, understanding those personas, understanding the drivers for people. And testing and piloting, starting small but getting something going, getting out there, being flexible and iterative, learning and evolving. I think one of the most important things has been to build technical expertise and capacity. It's been so lucky that we've been working with retrofit architects, and then over time we've been able to build that expertise into Carbon Co-op. And to be trading, this is a social enterprise, as I said, so it's a trading operation. And being collaborative and open, and we're part of many networks like Cooperatives UK and Community Energy England and other such things. Yeah, and we're very open to collaboration. And the last thing, we're currently going from just at the moment community share issue. So a community share issue, don't know if people are familiar with this, but as a cooperative we're able to sell ownership shares in People Powered Retrofit. We're absolutely inundated by demand at the moment, more than we can deal with. So we're expanding our capacity, expanding our staff team, and also working with other organisations around the UK. So if people want to, they can invest in People Powered Retrofit. Their investment gets them 5% return, and it's also eligible for social investment tax relief. And there are more details there, but it's going to end in 10 days, so there's not long left. But it's going really well. We're nearly funded, yeah. So yeah, that's my whistle-stop tour. We talked about my journey, we talked about retrofit and a little bit about what that's about. Talked about Carbon Co-op and how we started as a community organisation and built slowly, and People Powered Retrofit and some of the key aspects of that. Yeah, which I know is a lot to cram in to 40 minutes, so hopefully people aren't too overwhelmed. But yeah, we have 20 minutes for chat and what have you, yeah.
Great, thank you very much. So any specific questions for Jonathan? I mean, you've put a lot up there, Jonathan, so pretty challenging.
Yeah.
David?
So I got loads of questions, but I'll just start with this one. 40,000 or that kind of guideline
Yes.
that you were saying to retrofit, deep retrofit you call it,
Yeah.
of a house, is an awful lot, even with a low or zero interest loan. So is there low-hanging fruit that you would start off with to get the biggest returns initially, and then maybe look at doing the more expensive items later on?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways you can play it. I mean, you can do what we call air tightness work, sealing some of the gaps and reducing some of the airflow relatively simply, sometimes for free. You know, there are guides online, loads of guides out there rather, for energy saving trust and what have you. You can do things, and for almost no cost, you can make a big impact, especially on comfort. Then you're starting to think about what are the things you can do on your home where you're spending some money and you're getting some impact. And even now, loft insulation, we're constantly recommending more and more loft insulation. So it may be that if it's a few years since you insulated your loft, it might be something to top up. There's also underfloor insulation, again depends on your floor. And then we start to talk about solid wall insulation and things like that. That's bigger and bigger investment, you know. External wall insulation, you get a lot out of it, but there are conservation considerations, and the investment's bigger. Windows, you know, again, it's about having a whole house plan, because you don't want to do double glazed windows this year and triple glazed windows in 5 years' time. So, you know, sometimes investment can be about understanding what your plan is and building that plan. But yeah, on the money thing, what I would say as well, I think a lot of it's how we frame it. You know, we talk about £40,000 for a house to retrofit, but there are people that convert their loft, you know, few tens of thousands of pounds, new kitchen, few tens of thousands, new car, and often we say, you know, when will my retrofit pay back? But we don't say that about the car. You know, the car's not going to pay back, you know, ever. It's an investment, isn't it? It's an investment in our lives, in our utility. And, you know, I'd like to reframe this around that. But I do understand there's a lot of money, you know. It's
the VAT issue that Simon mentioned is an issue there, isn't it? Because if it's zero rated, then there's much more incentive to start it.
This is an interesting one. When we did the big scheme, 2016, it was 5% VAT, all that. And then there was a change to European law, or interpretation of European law. More latterly, there's been a reinterpretation again, you know, irrespective of Brexit, which has said actually, if the work's a majority energy efficiency, they should be 5% VAT rated. There's an opinion, which is a successful one from with a HMRC outcome around that, which I can share actually, which I keep meaning to put on our website, but it's on a low carbon Oxford, who are a similar organisation to ourselves. They successfully got 5% VAT. You know, yeah.
Pete, can I just ask, following on from that
Yeah.
question there, in your order of events, making the house as airtight as possible, let's say you did that brilliantly successfully, and you got down to the sort of airtightness level where you'd need to introduce some kind of ventilation system. We're fortunate we started from scratch and we got what's called mechanical ventilation.
Yeah.
Supplied by the Green Building.
Oh, brilliant,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Anyway, if you, one thing I've seen is that you can get individual, like extractors, which you would put into your bathroom that have a heat recovery facility.
Yeah.
So you expel the spent air, take the heat out of it, and bring that back in with fresh air.
Yeah.
Is there any way you could incorporate that sort of individual thing? That they'll be going down in price, won't they? They're expensive at the moment. There's nothing to them. They'll be, I don't know, 100 quid each or something, maybe eventually. So you could put those in individual rooms. Would that work?
Yeah, I mean, what we'd say, so we do a training on ventilation, because, and I think the recent events have just highlighted how important ventilation is, not just for things like COVID, but, you know, in school classrooms, the CO2 builds up, the concentration dips, you know, I'm sure we can all empathise with that. So what we would say is like any level of living in a house needs some kind of ventilation, you know. And as you say, you can step that up. Mechanical ventilation with heat recoveries kind of at the end. Lots of tubes, the central unit in the loft, bringing air in, recirculating it, recovering heat. You can get these decentralised devices as well. What we'd say is, what we often do is work with people like Air Eco, who are kind of specialist ventilation engineers who do schemes pretty cheaply. It's not loads and loads of money, and they've got a great website as well. But ventilation, can't speak highly enough about it. And in fact, they did a scheme in Thamesmead in London, where it was a very old brutalist housing estate, where they were able to do very minimal measures around like fabric, but they were able to use that heat recovery ventilation to make significant improvements to people's quality of life, and around like condensation and what have you. So yeah.
Sorry, the name of the organisation again?
Air Eco. It's AERECO. But there are other ventilation experts out there, but they're particularly good ones. Yeah.
It's Helen or Helen, yes.
You go first.
The exterior wall insulation, is
Yeah,
that literally attached to the wall, or is there some sort of foundation or footing under it?
Yeah. Let's go back.
Connected.
There are different approaches.
Right.
I'd say that, but the one we favour, and as I say, there are different ways to do it. So this is a brick property in South Manchester, and you can see we're using these footings. So what we've done is firstly taken some of the services away, and then we've dug down.
So there's a foundation there?
Yeah, we dug down underneath the foundations, and
Okay.
the benefit of that is that you get an insulative effect on the floor. And solid floors can be really hard to insulate for lots of different reasons, but that actually has an insulative effect to take them down. We've used expanded polystyrene there because it's particularly resistant to rain, and especially rain's hitting a pavement, it will over time, erode. Think something like wood fibre or any kind of natural material. This is another property, but same system, although maybe not footings, but we then built that up with wood fibre insulation, which is like big sheets of compacted wood fibre, which is fantastic for vapour permeability, so you're not trapping water in behind there, and it can breathe, so to speak. But there are different approaches. For example, this one, they've just insulated the front, and they've left the sides. There are others where they've insulated internally at the front and then externally at the side because they want to preserve the facade. So there are lots of different approaches. What I would say is there are examples of external wall insulation done very poorly. It's really important to think about the detailing, and by that I mean like how the insulation meets things like the roof or particular kind of eccentricities in a wall, like for example a bay window in this case. But it can be done really well, and it really durably, yeah. That answer your question? I can't remember the question.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was a foundation under it, or
Yeah,
whether it was
yeah,
tied
yeah.
to the wall, or, yeah.
Some schemes will kind of leave it. They'll just do it at the floor level, and they'll just kind of leave it. But we think that's not a great approach, really, and you miss out this benefit from not a lot of additional work.
So I'm a bit confused about walls.
Yeah, me too.
So what sort of building needs to have? I mean, if you have a cavity wall and cavity wall insulation, take it that isn't sufficient then. And does it depend on the age of the house, and are there
Yeah.
different fashions of building and sizes of cavities? And
Yes.
And you
Yeah,
have to
and-
find the site.
Yeah, and exactly. And you were talking about your cavity wall insulation failed, had it?
Well, it certainly wasn't very impressive. I mean, I think with me, I mean, it was literally the U-value calculation, that even if the cavity wall insulation was perfectly done, the U-value, so the amount of heat going through the wall, would still have been quite large. So I got a lot of extra benefit from having the external wall insulation on.
But yeah, it's really specific. Different wall, in the UK, we have different walls, different constructions, different ages, and different quality as well. So that's why we emphasise it's really important to understand what your property condition is and how it's best treated. I live in a stone-built property, and there's massive stone, and there are real limitations to the ability to externally. That's not possible. It could be done internally, but I'll lose space there. So there are trade-offs. There's what we would avoid saying is like, this is the way you have to do it, and you have to do it this way. It's going to relate to your property, the condition of your property, what your priorities are, how you want to approach it. But yeah, cavities, you can like inspect them, you can drill in them and put a boroscope in, which is a little camera on a thing, and we lend them out to our co-op members,
Right.
so they can, because unfortunately, cavity wall insulation in the UK is an instance of quite bad mis-selling over the years. It's not to say that every cavity wall insulation is bad, but I do know, and in this particularly the case in Northern Ireland, that a study of the insulation, cavity wall insulation, found 75% of them were ineffective in some way, poorly done, badly done, or failed. So, yeah, don't want to scare them.
So on a sort of, just thinking on a sort of, more national scale.
Yeah.
And you might tell me that point hasn't yet been reached. But at what point in our history did we start building houses with good wall insulation?
2035.
We haven't
regs
started
do
yet.
not-
The building
are very
regs are- Right.
Yeah, I mean,
So we're still
the
building
point is not
houses that need retrofit wall insulation.
Yeah.
Right.
That includes you. Yeah. Not the
So
new ones that
the
building
future building standard that should come in 20, will be announced in 2025 for implementation, or is it for implementation in 2025?
we don't really look at new build because it's not my area. But
Okay.
well, I know that the new build thing was cancelled. Cameron. And,
I mean, there were on the statute. I mean, I forget how it was, but it was on the statute books, but it wasn't legislated.
Yeah.
So there was effectively, zero energy houses almost on the statute books, but the legislation was never passed. It was the statutes were there, but not passed.
Interesting.
These sheets wall
Yes.
insulations that they're putting into new builds doesn't do the job then.
Well, the question was like, at what point of our history are we systematically building?
Oh,
We are. There are great examples out there you can point to. I don't know the exact one you're referring to, but there are great examples that you can say that's great and that's example. And indeed, a lot of the house builders were working up towards these standards, and then they were taken away, and then it's the imperative is gone. So.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Well, it's a
things-
political thing now.
Things like sheep's wool, because we had our 1949 house we needed to do a lot of work on. We didn't want to take down the side extension which had been a garage, so we internally insulated with sheep's wool, thinking fantastic. But you actually need an awful lot of sheep's wool to get the heat effect, this U value thing, which at the time I didn't understand. Our builder was great at trying new things, but he didn't really understand it. So it's fine apart from when the north wind blows. When the north wind blows, it is very cold.
Yeah, I would say it's often you get quite excited. Oh, sheep's wool, UK, fantastic, or British, Scottish wood for triple glazed windows. There are huge kind of barriers, performance, maintenance. I don't want to mention. Has anyone had clothes moths? None of their nice sheep's wool, jumper. But you can mitigate that. But anyway, that's why we go to Latvia for our triple glazed wood. The wood in our triple glazed windows, or green building stores do anyway. It's grown to higher quality at a better price, and there are compromises here, so it's ultra sustainable to have the sheep, but then what's the performance, a lot of these trade-offs. Got time for one or two questions?
So I think it's really what should we in North Yorkshire, what should we be looking for having, what should we be doing first? I mean, I think things like, should we be a co-op? Is that an essential part? I mean, your communication and involvement of other people seems to be absolutely essential. So meetings like this, starting on loft insulation, getting people thinking about that, perhaps. I don't know.
I mean, what worked for us was was doing the eco tours, doing workshops, practical skills that work for people, starting to do assessments and audits for people, services that people wanted. A lot of it is asking people, what do you want? Co-ops are great, I wouldn't say everyone has to be a co-op. What I would say one of the advantages of co-ops are you involve members in your governance and you understand from them what they want, and you're there to deliver it, so in that sense you're there to deliver the mission. I don't know, there are some great examples out there of organisations, we're one of them, but there are others out there as well. But I would say it's like, get going, get doing stuff, get out there, get talking to people. But really, really, really is the technical expertise one. You know, I don't know if there are technical experts in the room or people within your networks, but involving them and collaborating with them and benefiting from that expertise is really important. Because I think groups without that technical expertise are left to just advocate and say, you should go out there and you should kind of find people. Whereas I think that's the thing of People Powered Retrofit. We've been able to say, you know, you should do this and we can help you do this and we can give you the technical expertise to do that, you know. So yeah.
So we've been engaging, I mean, I guess we've discovered what retrofit coordinators are. So we've
Yes.
been engaging with Nick Parsons in Leeds.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, and then Retrofit Works.
Yeah.
They're piloting a remote scheme, so we've got a couple of people getting involved in having their house. So this is basically where somebody does an energy model for your house and then suggests, you know, based on diagrams, based on photographs, doing it remotely. So it's the retrofit, I guess you'd call it retrofit assessor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's the retrofit assessor role. We don't seem to have any retrofit coordinators locally. You know, there are some architects in York and Durham
Yeah.
who offer those skills.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think your idea of finding contractors and finding ways to engage. I like the idea of Harrogate. I mean, Harrogate, I had got from Zero Carbon Harrogate. That
Yes, they're brilliant.
I think they told me Harrogate was already delivering these courses. I understand from you they're in the process of thinking about
Yeah,
it.
we're
So-
scheduling them for January, February, March.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So we could look for around here. And,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
obviously, well, Middlesbrough's on near, you know.
Yeah.
Middlesbrough's on near is a big area, so you know there. But I think engaging. I did ask a few other contractors along, but you know, people working in.
Yeah.
But I think you know we'd certainly reach out to them.
And what about the local authority, or I don't know if there's a parish council here, you know?
I think it would be. I mean, so David here is one of our you know councillors on the. You're on North Yorkshire, aren't you, David? Sorry.
North Yorkshire and the National Park.
And the National Park.
Oh yeah, the national park.
So
Yeah,
National Park,
exactly. Yeah.
You know, it's great to have David here, and you know, but that's the idea, is to really engage with them. I think, you know, we haven't had things led from the council apart, but I mean that's unfair because there's a lot going on at the social level. It hasn't been done, I guess. Is that fair, David? I mean,
I mean, it should be sort of possibly we should be doing more local plans
Yeah.
on this sort of stuff. We've just done one at the National Park. There's one at Hambleton as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a good opportunity for local authorities to work with community groups and to be collaborative, you know, because there are strengths and weaknesses to what local authorities do and what a community group can do as well.
Well, one thing, Hambleton, which is our district council, have just brought out 2 new grants. So
Brilliant.
for people on £30,000 or less with a sort of low EPEC, could get, it's E.ON that's running it.
Yes.
So, as you said, there are downsides, so you have to use the E.ON contractors.
Yeah.
But the more we can let people know about that in the area, and also for private landlords,
Yeah.
where sort of it's a low EPEC rating. So we're trying to share that information. So if you know anybody on low income, then there is some funding. And so we need to sort of try and match people up.
My understanding is that local authorities now are supposed to produce a design code to go alongside their local plan. So
Yeah.
isn't retrofitting something that could fit quite nicely into a design code?
Yeah, our colleagues at Urbed, they worked on the National Design Code actually. So there's something there, but it's a bit beyond my expertise, the planning side. We do a little bit, I do a little bit, but yeah.
Hamilton might be interested. Paul, you just invited Paul, Director of Environment. So they're very keen to know what any suggestions we come up with, and so that might be something to take back to them.
Also, I think the National Park have done some really good stuff around. There was Eco Farms open weekend at one point, which I thought was really good because there were a lot of, obviously the properties, you know, the traditional buildings, quite atypical, but some interesting. I think some of the stone-built properties could be good case studies for heat pumps, and I know a lot of farms already use
Well,
them.
we've got
so.
quite a few case studies for CASaV Valley.
Yeah, right.
So
Yes,
Mike's
yes.
one of the case studies, we're one of the case studies, but it's farms as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We find windows are the biggest challenges.
Windows, yeah.
We've had some horrendous cases at planning committee where where the planners won't let them change the glass, and they're having to use a very expensive and probably very inefficient glass to get around the sort of listed legislation and or conservation areas.
So do you think that's about the planners or about the proposals that are coming to them?
Well, it's the planner's interpretation
Yeah.
of sort of sitting within the legislation of listed buildings.
It's different, but it's the same in Greater Manchester. There was permitted development for this kind of external wall insulation, but there are 10 boroughs within that Greater Manchester conurbation, and every planner has a different interpretation. So often that's the role that we play is, and I sympathise with planners. They have a hell of a time and they're not well resourced, so we're there to give them a bit of support and a bit of help them understand this as well, create some consistency. But I also think windows are a fantastic opportunity for joiners, good joiners. But yeah, if the interpretation of planning is an issue.
Are you still seeing that now, where the planners are refusing things like double glazing or having to keep the sort of ripply glass?
Absolutely, we had this one on, and we were doing it via Teams, a planning application, a farmhouse at Hindwell, and to be fair to the planners, they'd actually gone out and found some glass, but they hadn't actually told the applicant, and we're trying to broker a deal on Teams to try and get this glass into this planning application to get the deal passed. I think we as a committee we delegated it, but I think we got it in the end. But the cost of this stuff is
that's bizarre, because Chris France is being very bullish about being pro-insulation, pro-double glazing, all the rest of it. He's the head of planning, so the story doesn't match the reality.
Just in certain areas, yeah. Broadly it does, but not in these extreme cases where we've got where we're in sort of certain areas and say the listing part is the
listed buildings part.
Yeah.
Okay. Jonathan, I guess we better let you go. Thank you very much for coming over.
No, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah.
We sort of hijacked you on the way to Middlesbrough game.
Well, yeah, that's the big thing tomorrow, the game.
Well, good luck with that. And if you